Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. I keep accidentally calling this Black Horse because of the song that goes Black Horse and a Cherry Tree and the author's name being Rebecca Roanhorse. For some reason in my head, hoo-hoo, KT Tunstall. Anyone remember that song? This book has been on my radar for quite some time, specifically because of its really great reputation when it comes to specifically world building and LGBTQ+ representation, and boy oh boy, did it absolutely deliver on those fronts. I do have one pretty substantial criticism we'll get into, but first I would like to talk about probably the most impactful aspect of this book, and that would be its magnificent world building. I have experienced in my career here on YouTube a lot of different fantasy worlds inspired by all kinds of cultures or mix of cultures. From Upon a Burning Throne's bombastic, colorful approach to magic all the way over to The Witcher's hyper-European influence, I am becoming more and more partial to worlds that really show me the author trusts the reader to take an inch and run a mile with it. And it really feels like Black Sun is doing that sensationally. I have found a few different instances in my career here that when an author is writing for an audience that they're unsure of how much that potential audience knows about the culture, they could fall into the pitfall of over-explaining the cultural influence that is creating the fantastical world to the point where instead of feeling like being immersed in this fantasy world, it feels like you're just having things over-explained by an author. And Rebecca Roanhorse has masterfully dodged that pitfall, making me very curious to learn a whole lot more about the cultures that inspired this, and also understanding some key elements that definitely were inspiration for the epic world that was built out. But simultaneously, I am still absolutely transported to what feels like an entirely new and fantastical and whimsical fantasy world. That just feels like there was a lot of trust from the author of like, you'll get it, or you'll be curious to figure out where this is coming from, but let's exist in this story, in this moment, in this narrative, and I really appreciated that. I might just start pointing to Black Sun as a really great example of how to really thoroughly flesh out a fantasy world and make it feel like on that Middle-earth scope in terms of the political intrigue and the lore and the history available to the reader, because enough is given that you know there is so much more. It's the iceberg approach, and it's paying off here to just textbook success. It's the way, in my opinion, you should do world building. Give information that implies so much more and trust your reader's imagination to just run with it, because we as fantasy fans, we tend to do that. And I think that key element is what really allowed the pacing for this book to feel like some of the most natural I have come across so far this year. It is only January, but still. I wouldn't say it's the best I've ever read. I wasn't just getting through this in like 1 or 2 reads, but at no point did it come anywhere close to feeling like a slog. And that's partially due to what is driving the narrative.
But Daniel, I hear you asking, what exactly is the story of Black Sun? Well, don't worry. I'm going to tell you. Cat down time. You see, we're following Zelia as she is escorting a potential crow god to a city with a ticking clock element wearing away at the pages. But this is a multi-POV book, so not only are we following Zelia and the potential crow god, but we are jumping off to the political city and seeing so many different angles for the ideologies and belief motivating characters within this world. Now, you will have a preferred POV in this book, and it's going to be the ship that is bearing the crow god with our badass bisexual Zelia going on through the world and seeing so much of the wonder and whimsy that is to be beheld. But that does not mean the POV perspective in the book that is not with her is still not enticing and engaging on its own. But before we get into the rest of the secrets that are held within these pages, quick word from today's sponsor,
MD Hair. Now I know you might be looking at my luscious locks and thinking, Daniel, you don't need hair care products. What are you doing? Well, you silly goose, I've struggled with scalp health, and that's where MD Hair steps in. Their products have been formulated with FDA-approved medical and botanical ingredients. They are clean and sustainable, structured to work together to help your hair from the inside out. MD Hair is also using this process with AI to actually look at a photo of your scalp that you will submit that they can then send a tailored formula to help with whatever you're struggling with. By taking their quiz and uploading a photo of your scalp to their website, website, they are able to provide you with a customized treatment kit to fit your hair needs and track your hair and scalp health over time. What's really great is everything comes in one kit to help with your overall volume, texture, and just hair and scalp health. And of course, if you have any problems whatsoever with what's sent to you, they have a 24-hour support line to just tweak whatever needs tweaking to fit your needs. Currently, MD Hair is having a 70% discount with the first monthly kit with full-sized products. All you have to do is use the link in the description down below and use code GREEN70 to try it out for yourself today. Back to the video. With dense mythology and political thrills being a backdrop to the story taking place with the characters, you as a reader are often being enticed to read further due to wanting to understand wider motivations, whether it's systemic ones at like a political level of entire organizations to individuals. There is just this massive tapestry of whys and whats that slowly become clearer and clearer as you get through the book, and it just naturally folds in with the world building so well that while there is a whole lot of exposition, it's not boring, it's really interesting. It's kind of like how everyone says like, oh, show don't tell. Sometimes telling is the right way to go, and again, Black Sun is doing a lot of telling in extremely justified ways through characters figuring out other characters, and that chef's kiss. And I really just want to reemphasize one more time before we get into the actual story, this does feel epic. Like, this is one of those books that I'm amazed with how thin it is, how large this world does feel, and with having different like institutions and cities that are at clear ideological clashing, there's that weight behind so many smaller moments that you're wondering how big the ramifications of that could be, which just adds that permeating undertone throughout any scene in the book of like, what? Is this gonna be bad or only kind of bad? Now, that one punch that does sour my taste here a little bit for Black Sun is some frustration with specifically characters. I did really like the personalities put on display. They're very hyper modern, especially with the main character Zalia. I think I'm saying that right.
Until even
Jala, sorry. I just downloaded the audiobook purely to make sure of that. But if you're someone who wants the more classical, reserved, like noble fantasy character, that's not necessarily going to be what is consistently at the forefront. There are some characters who certainly feel more in that vein, but Rebecca Roanhorse has definitely embraced some of the aspects of like classic fantasy in terms of world building to give it that extra weight, but it's then filled with a cast that does feel hyper modern, which for me is kind of like the perfect mixture. That tends to be what I look for in my epic fantasy. But they are often lacking a certain oomph to them in terms of capability that resulted in me feeling frustrated with a large percentage of the characters. Granted, the way the story is heading and how these people are set to develop and possibly grow more oomphy without getting into spoilers, possibly I could look back on this as a positive and be like, yeah, this is a story of people getting more competent at what they're doing, growing, etc., etc. But there was just a level of lack of being able to accomplish certain things or ask the right questions or push back in certain ways where I was like, give me that! And it gave me a little bit of anxiety because I'm trying to write a story right now that is largely dependent on a main POV being incompetent in some ways to being driving the plot. Specifically very different than what's presented here in Black Sun, but it made me want to go and like double check, like, is this becoming a little bit maddening for the reader or is everything okay? And this is one of those books though that when you talk about character, you could just as easily talk about certain locations, how they felt, their impact on the story, and how they were developed for the reader to feel just as important as any other character. But okay, let's talk about specifically the LGBTQ+ representation. As someone who has recently come out as bi, I have been looking for specific types of rep in fantasy books, where I do like characters to be diversely spread across the spectrum of sexuality available for readers and characters to enjoy, but I really don't like it when it becomes like just the core of who they are entirely and starts to feel more like a caricature. We're getting way better about that aggressively in fiction, but it's still something you do occasionally come across. Not a problem here at all. In fact, this is top-notch LGBTQ+ rep in my opinion, because it is a key aspect of who these people are, but it is not the core to their entire existence. And for those of you who do leave in my comments section every now and then, like, how do you write good gay characters? One, thank you for genuinely wanting to do that. That is really nice to hear as someone who is now a part of the rainbow people. But it is that simple. You just need to write people and make their sexuality different, but treat it the same way, maybe a little different from like the politics or beliefs of the world you're crafting, but For them as an individual, it's just a key part of who they are without being a core part. And that distinction is all you really need to just master. And the reason I say some of this does harken back to more of like the classic side of fantasy is because I personally, in my experience, have seen a lot more of that side of the fantasy spectrum really focus on traversing and exploring a world in imaginative and beautiful, revealing ways. Whereas now, you'll often find fantasy stories like really focused on one city or, you know, one terrain that has a battlefield unfolding. It's just a pendulum that's going this way right now and is going to swing back and forth. But specifically the way Rebecca Roanhorse wrote the exploration of this world through its characters' travels felt hyper Middle-earthian to me. Not with prose nearly as purple, but just in the awe and wonder I felt at the imagination on display and the just intoxicating elements and questions that became hyper dominant in my mind. So the characterization, I mean, Zalia, however you said their name, they start up with a hangover being like, oh, shut the fuck up to people. Like, that's the type of characterization you're getting, but in a magical world. Like, I don't know how else to put it. Like, I will have dreams, I'm sure, in the future where I feel influence from the wonder that was painted on the page here, and I am going to dig it. I love whenever I just take a moment on the channel, by a moment I mean like a few months, to just go through like the top recommended books from people, because if I'm ever bogged down in a bunch of back-to-back bad reads, you all are so good at being like, this will restore your faith in literature. And this didn't like fully restore my faith in literature, but it did remind me like there is still just stories that hit different. And no matter how much you read, there are authors out there whose imaginations will inspire you. And Black Sun, that I can guarantee it'll do for 90+% of readers. But this has just been my review of Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. Like and subscribe if you have not already, and hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. Have a good one, y'all. Peace. And of course, I'd like to record a special shout out to my latest high tier Patreon, Ito Cohen. Thank you so much.